If you're watching this, then you know by now a huge problem is heading our way. An emergency meeting is being called at our usual place immediately. Free bagels.
When it comes to blowing things up in the most spectacular way possible, nobody quite does it like Roland Emmerich. He's basically the king of big-budget disaster movies. From Independence Day to The Day After Tomorrow and then 2012, which was based on that whole idea that the Mayans had somehow predicted the world's end, he's carved out a niche in making audiences watch Earth fall apart again and again. And now he's back at it with his latest wild ride, Moonfall. Just like 2012, this one leans into a pretty out-there theory, specifically the hollow moon theory, which, whether you buy it or not, makes for some pretty crazy sci-fi fun on the big screen. So naturally, after people watched Moonfall, there were a bunch of questions left hanging in the air. One of the big ones? Whether or not we're going to get a sequel. Because, let's be honest, Emmerich doesn't exactly make small, self-contained stories. He builds worlds that feel like they're begging for more. So now the question is, will there be a Moonfall 2? Let's break it all down. Before any sequel can get off the ground, it really comes down to whether Roland Emmerich even wants to go back to that world again. And the short answer? Maybe. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, he made it clear that while he's not dying to make another one just for the sake of it, he's definitely open to the idea if certain things fall into place. He basically said that if the first film becomes a massive hit, then sure, he'd consider doing not just one sequel, but two. And he even mentioned doing them back-to-back with a real cliffhanger in between. That kind of approach isn't totally new for him. He talked about doing something similar with Independence Day Resurgence, although that never really turned into a full-blown franchise like he may have hoped. So while he's not out here campaigning for a sequel, he's left the door wide open. If the first movie crushes it at the box office, then he's in. Otherwise, he's totally fine with letting it be a one-and-done situation. But for fans who liked what Moonfall brought to the table, there's at least a little hope. Now, what about the cast? Specifically, Patrick Wilson, who played disgraced astronaut Brian Harper, the guy who ends up being a key player in stopping the moon from literally crashing into Earth. Well, Wilson has been asked whether he'd return if there was a sequel, and his answer wasn't exactly reassuring. In an interview with Screen Rant, Wilson admitted that Emmerich had tossed around ideas for Moonfall 2 and even Moonfall 3, but nothing has been locked in. Apparently, Emmerich plays it pretty casual when it comes to sequels. He might say something vague like, "I've got this cool idea for the next one," but when pressed for details, he'll shrug it off with a, I'm not sure yet. Wilson even joked that he's scared to ask whether he'd be part of any sequel, because there's always that awkward possibility Emmerich might say, "Oh no, this one doesn't include you," and nobody wants to hear that. So for now, Wilson is taking the don't ask, don't stress route and just waiting to see if anything actually happens. On a more practical note, he also pointed out how hard it is to get any movie made these days, especially a massive one with a huge budget. So unless Moonfall makes serious money, it's unlikely the studio will take another swing at it. Let's talk about how Moonfall actually ends. Without going into full detail about the chaotic, galaxy-brained third act, the final moments clearly leave room for more story. The most interesting part? John Bradley's character, Casey Houseman. Casey, the conspiracy theorist who turns out to be right all along, ends up sacrificing himself to save Earth. At least, that's how it looks. But then we find out that he's not exactly gone. The ancient OS that runs the moon actually copies his consciousness, which means KC is now part of the moon. Not weird at all, right? Anyway, the movie closes with the OS telling KC that they need to get to work. That one line is the big tease, a promise that there's more to come. What exactly they're working on is left up in the air, but clearly Earth wasn't saved for good. There's probably a bigger threat coming, and now KC is somehow involved in stopping it. One thing that could really change the game for Moonfall 2 is the cast. The first movie had recognizable faces like Halle Berry, Patrick Wilson, and John Bradley, but it didn't have the kind of massive A-list draw that gets people rushing to theaters. If a sequel wants to go bigger and pull in a larger crowd, adding some serious star power could help. Think about what other franchises have done. Fast and Furious kept upping the ante by bringing in folks like Dwayne Johnson and Jason Statham. Transformers brought in Mark Wahlberg at one point. If Moonfall 2 gets someone like Zendaya, Chris Pratt, Florence Pugh, or even Keanu Reeves, that would definitely get more attention. And it's not just about name recognition, it's about pulling in fans from other fandoms. If you cast someone from the MCU or Star Wars, suddenly you've got a whole new group of moviegoers who might not have cared before. In today's crowded sci-fi space, that could be the edge Moonfall 2 needs to stand out. And here's where things get tricky. Whether Lionsgate actually greenlights a sequel mostly depends on how much money the first one makes, and the bar is pretty high. Reports say Moonfall had a budget of around $140 million, which is on par with superhero films. So for it to be considered a hit, it probably needs to make at least $400 million worldwide, maybe more. The pandemic era has changed what success looks like at the box office. Movies that used to rake in over $1 billion are now happy to clear $500 million. Disaster movies in particular are unpredictable. Some, like 2012, end up being huge hits. Others, like Geostorm, totally tank. Emmerich himself has said the movie would need to be an enormous success before he jumps back in. But what does that mean? Is $400 million enough? Or is he thinking more like $750 million? That number feels way out of reach right now, especially with so many blockbusters competing for attention. Still, if enough people show up and stream it later on, there's always a chance. And just in case you haven't seen it yet or need a refresher, Moonfall starts with a mysterious force knocking the moon out of its orbit, sending it on a deadly path straight toward Earth. With only weeks before impact, the planet is basically falling into chaos. NASA executive Jo Fowler, played by Halle Berry, believes she has the solution, but almost no one believes her, except Brian Harper, a former astronaut, and Casey Houseman, who's been ranting about space conspiracies on the internet for years. These three unlikely heroes team up to launch a last-minute mission into space, risking everything to stop the moon from crashing into Earth. Along the way, they discover that the moon isn't what we thought it was. It's actually a giant artificial megastructure created by ancient humans to protect the Earth. And yes, that is somehow not the weirdest part of the movie. So even though Moonfall is kind of ridiculous, in the best way, it sets up a world that could totally keep going, especially with KC still out there as a digital consciousness, working with the moon's ancient OS. If there's more danger on the horizon, a sequel could easily pick up that thread and run with it. And that's that for today's video. Please click on the like button, share this video with your family and friends, and subscribe to our channel for more updates. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.